Got to get my tea to where it's accessible so I don't sound ridiculous because being exposed to um, terrible amounts of people, like you can't go to Disneyland and not get sick. Like it's not anymore. So that, and
Yeah,
it
it
was
does.
wicked cold. Like it was rainy and windy and cold. And so like I think Kristen and I packed not the best gear, but good enough, but not good enough for the girls. So that meant the girls had our gear. And so like not only was I exposed to like a ton of people, I was like freezing my butt off for 12 hours a day. So not 12 hours, it was just the really cold times.
I,
Yeah.
I will still say, though, ultimately, I think you made the right call because this at least speeds up the process for you. Because otherwise, the girls would have been sick first. And
Yeah.
then while you
Yeah.
were taking care of them, you would have inevitably ended up
Mm-hmm.
sick. And so, yeah, just, you know what? Knock it out now. Make it
Yeah.
part of the Lenten experience for yourself.
There you go. There you go. This is my
What
own
am I giving
suffering.
up? My sense of smell?
My health.
Yeah, there we go. My very life. To a lesser degree than our Lord, yes, but still my life.
Oh, if I actually thought he would take it, I would do it. But yeah.
I mean, he will. We're just not confident what we're getting with it.
Right. Oh man. All right. Let's hit an intro and jump into it. Welcome to the podcast, Blue Collar Scholars. Not long ago, a group of brilliant minds met together at a pub to discuss their unfinished works. They recognized the value of coming together around delicious beverages and having meaningful conversations. That group was known as the Inklings. The InkleDeux podcast here, we're working to be the second iteration of that group. So, pour yourself a craft beverage, pull up a chair, and join the conversation. Okay, have you had anything good lately?
No,
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
like
I've had a plethora.
I was hoping with you having been traveling, and then I'm gonna let you just take it then.
That's fair. So I had a little, I'll start with Disneyland. And then, but just like for the coming days, I got a Rogue sample pack, which has been
Ooh,
pretty good. I like Rogue. And then I did like everybody was like, "Hey, let's go play in the snow," because it snowed, like 3 feet in Flagstaff and Williams this weekend.
yep.
And we're like, okay, we need to go do it now because it's our only free Saturday. So I made a brewery trip out of it and didn't tell anybody. So
That's my guy.
so we stopped in Camp Verde at Verde Brewing for lunch, and then played in the snow, and then hit Historic Brewing in Williams before coming home. So
They
I've
just
had a
happen to be the restaurants. I don't know what
they
to tell you. Like,
they made good food,
yep.
and but there was a point in which my oldest was like, "Why is everything got brewing in the name?" Mm.
It's the weirdest thing, kid. I don't know what
Weird,
to
I
tell
know,
you.
right? I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't let me pick the restaurants.
Oh, come on. You're not letting them pick because it's all going to be looking for golden arches.
That is the truth, man. Yeah, they want a toy for sure. Oh man, so let's kick it off with Disneyland. So, I mean, we didn't do a whole lot on the beverage front, on the beer side anyway. There is in California Adventure, we usually do like a pizza and beer night because they have like a pizza spot over there and then a beer
Sure.
station on the other side. And I get the Sculpin Grapefruit IPA, and I mean, like, I don't buy it very often because it's actually kind of an expensive beer. Uh, but when you're in Disneyland, everything is expensive, so it's kind of relative.
That's that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And so, like, it was that or Sierra Nevada, so I went with the Sculpin, and it's just every time it's so good. Like they just do their stuff really, really well, and it's not it's got grapefruit IPA, but it's not fruity and like juicy. It's just really well done.
Yeah, man. I remember that was the first that was like the first fruit beer that I ever really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, same kind of deal. It was one of those things where I was at a place that they didn't have like anything on tap, but one of those spots that has like hundreds of different bottles,
Mm-hmm.
and the selection's different every week, like the massive chalkboard with the
Yep.
menu written on
Yep.
it. And since everything was a little bit pricey, I was like, yeah, sure. I've heard good things about it. I don't know. But man, it is just, it is so incredibly well balanced in terms
Yeah.
of the way the flavors play together and everything.
And it's bitter, but not resiny. It's
Yep.
fruity, but not like it's just, yeah, it's really good. And then from the coffee side, like so there was no good coffee experiences. Let's just say that way. So,
Uh huh.
one, it is a travesty that a place that calls itself the most magical place on earth has the worst coffee you could ever get. Like, it is garbage coffee. It is the worst. And even like the coffee, like Kristen was like, "Ooh, it's like a butter pecan cold brew." And we're like, "Ooh," at one of the fancy places, so we got it. And you're like, "Oh, it's like cream and then bad coffee." Like, you couldn't even cover how bad the coffee was with the
Ugh.
sugar and cream. Like, so like I think it's crazy that they can't get somebody that doesn't just suck terrible in there. Like, just even like a moderately good roaster. Like, there's a ton of them out there, but
Yeah.
I would go for Dunkin' over what they have in there, man. It's not good.
Jeez.
And then to cap it all off, so in our hotel room, there was, they usually give you those little personal brewers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, so normally, and it's like on the sink area that's like in the shared space. So, like, but in our room, it was that shared sink space was actually in the bathroom. And so the coffee pot was in the bathroom. And I was like, there is no way I am drinking some poo brew. Like,
Yeah.
there's
I
no way I would put anything out of that towards my mouth ever.
Yeah, my level of confidence in the human race as a whole is not high enough to think that I should drink something that has been kept like open air in a
Yeah.
public restroom, which is
No.
basically what that amounts to.
Yes. Yeah. So I was
Best
just
case scenario, I'm drinking the Lysol they cleaned it with.
best case.
Yeah.
Best case. I mean, and that's a far and away best case.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. I'm not listing any of the other cases because I'm
And that
trying
would
to
have
keep
only
that
been
like
on the first day.
I'm trying to keep that family friendly rating
yeah,
going
yeah,
here.
yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
know,
That's a good call. We should probably stop it there. We should probably stop it there. You're right. You're right. But yeah, it was one of those things. I looked at it and I was just like, this is insane. I would never do this.
yeah.
But so yeah, that's kind of at Disneyland. We didn't do too much just because, again, they took everything from us, and like I'm my serfdom starts in like a couple of weeks. I'm allowed to say goodbye to my friends and family, and then I got to go work in the mines for Mickey ears for the next 50 years, and then I'll be back.
Just hearing the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Hi ho,
Oh,
hi
that's
ho.
exactly right.
Didn't realize
Oh,
it was a documentary, did you?
oh man. Okay, one last story. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to do two more stories, and then we'll get into it. I promise. But these were really funny, and I wanted to share them. So
Before the
one,
memory fades. Yeah.
yeah, my youngest, we did the Bippity Boppity Boutique, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
where they like get fairy dust and all dressed up like princesses and stuff. And of course, my youngest is the one that's like just full of attitude. And so everybody's calling her a princess and how pretty she was. And so she was feeling, she was feeling the power of her royalty
Uh huh.
that was bestowed upon her. And there was a point in line where she's just sitting there and she's like, I'm a princess. Bow, bow. And then she gets mad and she's like, why won't anybody bow to me? And I was like, oh boy, this is the making of an evil queen right here, man.
I was
Like,
gonna say,
starting.
man. Oh, like it's just a question of which version of the origin story is it. Are you going to be the one who drives her there by like refusing and trying to correct her? Or are
Yeah.
you going to be the one who encourages her there by like playing along and bowing and training her that way?
Yeah.
No matter what, you know things don't play out well for the parents in a Disney movie.
Yeah, that is the truth. You're right. I should have played it differently. But yeah, no, and I was like, I'm a free man. I bow to no one.
Kicked her in the chest.
Oh
You're a
man.
monster.
And then the next best line that I got was again from that same daughter. we rode the Matterhorn, and they had changed it since we had ridden it. So like we thought it was just like the same old like Rudolph Yeti, and
Yeah.
it's not anymore. It's like actually kind of scary, and so it freaked my youngest out a little bit. And so we got to the bottom of the ride, and the worker could see that she was kind of freaked out. She's like, you know what? It's fake. Don't worry about it. He's a vegetarian. His favorite food is churros. Like don't worry about it. And she's like, oh yeah, okay. And then the next day she was telling grandma about it. She's like, this and that. And she's like, but I think the Yeti saw me and thought I was a screaming churro because because he really wanted me.
He thought I was a screaming churro.
Just like the idea of this screaming churro with arms flapping in the little cart as the Yeti tries to bite it. I was like, that is. Oh, it was the
I'm
best
crying.
imagery I'd had in a long time. So
I'm
it was
genuinely crying.
it was that is the if anything, those two things there made the whole Disney trip worth it for me. Just the ridiculous stories. Oh man, the things I deal with.
If only the order had been reversed, then you could have told her, I don't bow to churros.
I don't bow to churros. Oh crap. Okay. All right. Well, that was my adventure for last week. So hopefully everybody enjoyed Walter, and we'll probably hear him again before too long. Have him around.
Definitely.
It's nice for when stuff like this happens and we got somebody to fill in. So that was good. But I started reading C.S. Lewis's Reflections on the Psalms, which was sitting on my shelf for however many years, right? And it was
on the long list of books there to make you look well read without having to read them.
Yep, that's exactly what all of that shelf is right there. And not to go down the poop humor all over again, but like I started it, not by choice really, but because like I really had to go to the bathroom and I needed a book, but somebody was already in the bathroom. And so the book I was reading was locked up in that bathroom. And so I made a panic decision and I grabbed that book. And then I was like, oh, this book is pretty good, actually. So then I decided to keep reading it. So that's how I choose my books.
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Mysterious ways. But there was this really interesting line in there that caught me. And it, I wrote that little blog about the Asbury revival. And I was thinking about it because my response to that in hindsight wasn't what I wish it would have been, and I don't know that I was completely, I don't think I was cynical on it as in like, oh, this is fake or, anything like that. But I think I was more like nonchalant or non-responsive. I was just like, oh, okay. When, like if God is sweeping in hundreds of people into the church, like at once, you're like, that's not something we should all just kind of be like, oh, cool story, bro. Like we should be supporting that with prayer and things like, because it, and there was other movements that happened around the country kind of in response to it. And so I was kind of upset with my own response to it. And then reading in this book with Lewis in it, he caught me with, the way that I love Lewis and the way that he writes and how he kind of is, he's not like, he doesn't put himself down, but he definitely is very, he's like, hey, this is me. You might like it, you might not like it, but he does it in this kind of like
very British, very disarming.
Yeah, it really is, and I one of the things I love about it, and the gist of it, without sitting here and reading it because nobody wants to sit here and listen to me read, also because I'm awful at reading out loud. It's just that he was talking about like his harshest critics weren't from atheists, and they weren't from like the ultra convicted. Is that right? It was like the thorough believers or the atheists. It wasn't like the extremes on either side. It was usually I think he called it the semi-believer, right?
Yeah.
And it was the people in the middle that tended to criticize him the hardest, like the not like they weren't all in on one side or the other. And that really caught me because it kind of touched on that feeling I was having about not being on one side or the other in response to this revival. I was kind of like, meh, whatever. And I'm not one to want to be in that lukewarm middle of the fence, spewed
Yeah.
from my mouth type of a thing. Like I kind of want to be all in. And so these two things connected for me. And so I was like, that's interesting that the semi-believer would be the most critical versus the thorough or the atheist,
Yeah.
you know?
No, I agree. And I think, it is interesting the way that works. And it ties into some things that I feel like we've touched on like partially before. This idea of like the people who kind of have a foot in each camp, the ones who aren't all in one way or the other, they tend to be a lot quicker to respond, a lot quicker to jump in with comments and with arguments. And I think, there's a couple of ways to look at it. So there's, on the one hand, why are the like really hardcore believers or the hardcore atheists, why are they not jumping in on Lewis when he's saying things? Because they know better. They've had conversations with wackos like this guy before. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing. One of the things that I think is really admirable about Lewis is the fact that he's not trying to be original. Like, so he phrases things in a new way because he is free to think about old things.
Yeah.
And so because of that,
Well
like
said.
The atheists who disagree with him have already heard this comment before, have already heard this statement before. They've already had the argument. Forget it. Leave the guy alone. The people who are like hardcore believers of some other different church, you know what? Look, we've heard this before. We've had this conversation before. And possibly even, if we want to give the most charitable reading possible to it, they might even be like, you know what? Look, man, I know we disagree about this, but there's all these other things that we think you're awesome on.
Yeah. The
And so,
humility
like,
that comes with pursuing truth.
yes.
Right. So like even if
that
you're an
recognition.
atheist, like there's a humility that comes with it. And so you can almost engage rather than defend.
Yes, and that's exactly it. And I think that's what's missing in the semi-believers that makes them so proactive is the fact that like they don't totally know where they stand. Well, let me rephrase that a little bit. They do know. They know exactly where they stand, but they have no idea where that is. Like they know they are here. But going back to what you were just saying, because this is something that just popped into my head now as I was sitting here talking and listening to you, they don't have that humility of seeking truth, of realizing that they're on a continuum somewhere, that they are closer to truth than they once were, but that they've still got a long ways to go. This space that they are in is the full extent of their knowledge and, probably more damning, the full extent of their desire. Like, no. I am here, and I have here figured out, and I need you to leave me the heck alone here. Because anything you say, like, it's going to require action from me. And quite frankly, action is not my favorite thing.
That's an interesting point because you're right. There is this weird transition that like the whole, the more you learn, the less you know type of a thing, that realization. And it's a trope, but
It is.
It's real though too. Like we've all had this point and where you're like, freaking A, like there's so much more out there. And like I remember I had the realization in an astronomy class, and it was so like I didn't like it actually.
Yeah.
Like it was scary to me because I was so small, and it made me feel insignificant. And so like having this known world meant that I was safe and protected. But as soon as I opened it up and I could see that there was no beginning and no end to it, it was freaking scary, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And then so like that's when the cat claws come out, man. Like I'm afraid now. Close the box back up. Like it's too scary to not have a beginning or an end in
Yep.
this whole scheme. Um, and so I think you're right there on that. There's something to that whole like wanting to just keep my little bubble where it's at.
Yeah. Well, and like there's a certain sense too of like the belief that, you know what, this is enough. Like there's,
Mm,
we talk a lot of times in faith conversations, we'll talk about the idea of happiness or contentment and things like that. And there's this line from the old version of the catechism that was used in the United States. It's still around. So if you're a trad listening, don't get mad at me. I'm not being dismissive. But like the Baltimore Catechism had this great line about like why God created us. It was that to know, love, and serve Him in this life and to be with Him forever in the next. But there was another one in there. I can't remember what the specific question was that it was answering, but it was basically something to the effect of the goal was for us to be reasonably happy in this life and perfectly happy in the next. And
mm,
like that idea of a reasonable happiness, I think is like the starting point. Like having that as a goal is the starting point of being able to open ourselves up to that infinite. Like, because if my goal is happiness in this life, like total happiness in this life and
hmm.
happiness in the next, that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
And the only way I can convince myself that I will be totally happy in this life is if my bubble is like secure.
Yeah.
And as soon as a tiny little pinprick starts happening there,
Hmm.
it's all gonna fall apart. And so, like you
Right.
said, cat claws are out, hissing,
Yep.
whatever it takes to just like, no, you need to go away. And I can't engage in the conversation because it's not even about me convincing you you're wrong. It's about me convincing myself I'm right.
Mm,
I don't care if you continue to believe this stuff. I just need you to go away and leave me here, and I will have driven you off having won the argument and having proven that I am secure here in my bubble, in my
oh man,
space.
that is so good because it was I was having this thought kind of coming up, and you just connected the dots for me like perfectly, and it was is the idea of the cynic and how so again, those of you who know Kelly Fitzsimmons was been on the show. She was my teacher for a few classes in college, and throughout those classes, you know, they didn't view cynics as particularly useful in any way, shape, or form because all they did was bring problems, but they
Uh
were
huh.
unwilling to ever pose solutions, right? So it was like a somebody who just came in and wanted to just poke holes in everything, but they didn't ever want to try to solve the problem to get anywhere. So you didn't make it anywhere because all you did is just come in and poke a bunch of holes, and but you didn't try to answer any questions. And that's kind of what I was thinking there too, is that the semi-believer is kind of like the cynic who has maybe a rudimentary belief of certain things, and just like you said, that they it's less about that the argument or the other person, it's more about me feeling good about myself or doing something because they don't have that truth or they don't have something to build on, so they just kind of go around poking holes in other people's boats so that they can kind of feel good about themselves. And I have legitimately known cynics who all they do, they their only source of joy in life is poking holes in the boats of religious people.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and I think you're right. There is because if these boats continue to float around me, then I might have to get off my island. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, I am justified in being on my island because I can convince myself that they're all about to sink. And that's why I'm not going to hear from them again. Not because they've made it somewhere good, but because they are all at the bottom of the ocean. Never mind the fact that yes, I've noticed these holes. I didn't bother to notice all the buckets they had for bailing some of the water out. Or like I think part of the problem too for the cynic or for a semi-believer is kind of a almost a different understanding of what could be meant by the phrase semi-believer. Like someone who kind of believes something.
Mm-hmm.
Like just this
Mm-hmm.
idea of they don't have a real conviction. They're holding on to, or not even holding on to, because if they're holding on to a belief, then they're a believer. But they're claiming a belief. They're claiming something based on the idea that they feel like they should. The belief is a means to an end. Like it's, I believe, and we see this in the whole religious spectrum. So there are the people who are, cultural Catholics, for example. The ones who are, yeah, no, I go to mass, but that's because this is my people, my culture, my history. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have to, or else like I'm disconnected and I'm an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Or, atheists, especially, and I'm not taking shots at anyone unless this is you, in which case, haha, gotcha. Like, honestly, it is kind of one of those things. If you're mad at what I'm about to say, it's probably because I hit too close to home. But
Mm-hmm.
college atheists who
Yes.
are like latched onto this idea there is no God, there is no truth, there is no absolute. And why do they believe that? Because all of the cool people around them say that that's kind of the way it is. This teacher who's really, really smart and
Yep.
who like really put some people in their place with some arguments, keeping in mind that this is like a 55-year-old man talking to an 18-year-old kid, and the
Mm-hmm.
55-year-old man had weeks to plan his lesson to prepare for exactly the types of things he was going to hear, and the 18-year-old kid was blindsided. But nevertheless, man,
Yep.
did he make a good case.
Yeah. You got one there, and I think like I'm creating us another category, which is like the just learned zealot. Like
Mm,
I just learned this one thing, and you don't have the fullness of it. You
yes.
just learned it, and so because you just learned it, you are now the like defender of that one piece of truth. And like, and I am so like I've done it a ton of times. Like I just did it with this barbecue guy. I was like, oh man, you did this thing. He's been a chef for like, doing this thing for like 30 years. He's like, no, man, that's not real. I was like, oh crap. I'm sorry. Like that was my fault. I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna learn a little bit more. And so I had to roll it back real quick. But as soon as we learn this one thing and we see somebody do something contrary, like, oh, you're wrong. But like
Mm-hmm.
you don't have all the context or the history or like why you believe all of it. You just believe this one thing.
Well, and like
College atheist. That's right.
the really horrifying thing about the one thing believer is that like they never get there's the possibility of them
Mm-hmm.
never getting context because what they do is just continue to latch on to the new one thing that they've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of like recognizing these things that they're learning on kind of this continuum that's like actually building a coherent, cohesive world where things make sense, instead they spend their entire lives focused on this tiny little pinhole of a view of reality. And all they ever do is move from one pinhole to the next, to the
Mm-hmm.
next, to the next. And it, again, like you said, it can feel very safe. Like you were talking about with your astronomy
Mm-hmm.
class, where it's like, no, no, I'm in this self contained world. All I can see is this. It's so small that I can't possibly be threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel very safe, but it's also so incredibly limiting. And it shuts down our ability to have relationship with other people because no one wants to deal with you when you're coming at them that way. Cuts off your relationship with like the universe itself because
Mm-hmm.
you can never, it'd be like saying I knew all about someone because of their shoe size. Like
Yeah.
no, no, I know this one thing about it.
Yep.
And it absolutely blocks out the possibility of getting to know the creator who's behind the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, if you were going to boil it down into a life lesson, what do you think you would bring this around into?
I would say for me, and like obviously there are exceptions and there are caveats because we shouldn't forget that some people are just jackasses. Like that's always got to be the caveat that's in there.
Yeah.
And so like I'm throwing that out as a starting point. Like assuming that the person who I'm talking to is not just an absolute jackass. If someone says something that makes me feel threatened, defensive, and uncomfortable, and assuming that that's not their goal, then I need to look at myself for the reason why. That doesn't mean I stay there and continue the conversation or anything like that. I'm feeling threatened. I should do the smart thing and get out of that conversation, but I should look into it and try and follow up another time when I've like got myself back under control. Because chances are pretty good that what is going to happen if I do that is that I'm going to find out that like scary, threatening thing were growing pains. Yeah. And that I'm actually like finding myself in an opportunity to develop something. Even if it's just a clearer understanding of what I already knew and what I already believed, through this challenge, it's going to make it stronger, as opposed to like me putting on my armor, drawing my sword, and getting ready for battle. It's like, oh, actually, very few people start conversations looking for battles. There are definitely some, but very few.
Yeah.
I should probably not assume that the minority is the entirety on this thing.
Yeah, I think that you kind of hit the analogy I was going for too, is that like the moment you feel threatened, our instinct is to drop the defensive shield down. But if you can trust that your God is bigger than this conversation, and you can, instead of dropping your shield down and becoming defensive, but yeah, like you said, use that as an internal reflection and like write down what you were feeling. Like, oh, he said this and I felt this way, and why did I feel this way? And then you can go search it out afterwards. And that's how conversations help you grow. And that's how you become bigger, better, stronger, faster, all of those things. Defensiveness stops the growth. Like it caps you. So yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, for me, and it's, you know, in the same vein is just like that conviction of this, just the idea of being a semi-believer should hurt a little bit, should sting, should be like an icky taste in your mouth, you know, like, and so just, I would use it as an opportunity to be like, am I on the fence? Like, am I lukewarm? Like, and I'm not saying you should be, you know, a zealot running around, you know, screaming in people's faces and smacking them with a Bible, but you know, like your disposition, like, are you lukewarm? Like if somebody came to you about this stuff, like, would you just be like, oh yeah, God's moving, whatever, that's cool, you know? Or would you be like, hey, that's what's actually important to me, you know, like, and so we've kind of talked about the different types of semi-believers, and, you know, we've all been there. And if we can have the humility to acknowledge it, then we can have the, you know, ability to step off the fence and move towards going all in. Going all in is hard.
It is.
You know, but staying on the fence out of fear is way worse than the risk of, or the fear of anything that could happen going all in my opinion.
Sure. Well, and I think part of it too is to remember, like, semi-believer as a transitional state is not necessarily a bad thing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like when you hear about the revival, for example, being like, oh, that's interesting. Or, oh, weird. But then as you start to hear more about it, does that motivate you to look into it? Because, like, realistically, what it can't be is inconsequential. Either it is the authentic spirit of God moving and bringing people closer to him, in which case we have to be excited, or it's charlatans running around with like some fake gospel leading the flock astray, in which case we have to be militantly opposed.
Right.
But like it can't be inconsequential.
Yeah.
And so like if we recognize semi-believer as like this temporary state while we're figuring out which side of the fence we're going to jump onto, cool. Yep. But we got to be ready to jump.
Yeah. Inconsequential is the right word. Yeah, if God is ever inconsequential in your life, then it's wrong. Like you're doing life wrong. That's 100%. I like that. That's well said. Alrighty, well, folks, we're going to do our reminder here of supporting this podcast with purchasing of some coffee, and that is a
Way better than
terrible.
the Disneyland stuff. So
Yeah, it's way better than Disneyland, and that was actually like the worst approach to a pitch like I've ever tried. Like I've done this closeout multiple times, and like, have you ever just seen that server who has like the tray and he starts stumbling and you can see the bottles like swaying? And you're like, oh, he's going down, but it takes like a minute for it to go. That's what you
yeah,
just
they've got
witnessed
just
right
enough
there.
balance to kind of like keep themselves up, which
Yeah.
ultimately just ends up making the crash worse.
Yeah. That's exactly what just happened. That was awful. Holy cow. But
We're
anyway,
works in progress.
works
It's the whole
in
starting
progress.
whole starting point of everything we're doing here, man.
Oh man. But hopefully this conversation was helpful. It's meaningful. We're probably gonna stick around this Psalms, reflections on the Psalms. It's gonna be a pretty, it's gonna have quite a bit of food for thought. So if you would like to support these conversations, please jump on that website, buy some coffee. We'd love to ship it to you, roasted fresh. And it is, like AJ said, much better than the crap they serve at Disneyland. So you got anything else on your brain, man?
No, not a thing.
Right on, right on. All right, with that, we will say
Adieu.